Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Gary Thompson, joined by Brian Gottlieb. We have a top 10-ish episode for y'all today for March of the Machine. But first, Brian, I need to regale you with stories from Richmond, Virginia.
I would love to hear those stories. Few places are nearer and dearer to my heart than Richmond, Virginia Convention Center, where I've been. Yes. I don't even know how many times, like just unfathomable times, more times than anyone should ever be to one convention center. Although I really like, what's the name of the Asian place? I don't think you're as big of a fan as I am. I think it's a Korean place specifically. And I know.
Is it J Kogi? Because I ate there today.
That's it. Yeah. I know Cho always wants to go with me, and I'm a big fan of J Kogi as well. So I'm glad you got it in while you were there.
Well, J Cho may have had something to do.
I believe it.
So he was like, what do you want to do for dinner? I was like, I don't care. I never care. You know, food is mostly fuel to me. And he was like, J Kogi? I'm like, yeah, let's do it.
Love it.
So some things never change. And I, like you, had been to the Richmond Convention Center many times. And I think, given that I live here and especially, 10 minutes away from it, I am racking up more and more appearances very quickly.
That makes sense. I expect that to be your home turf, especially given like how rarely you travel to other places. I think a lot of your attendance at Magic tournaments will be even more centered around the Richmond Convention Center, if that is possible.
Yeah, I mean, at least until I get the hell out of here and figure out where I want to go. But, that's a story for another day. Anyway, there was an SCG / Command Fest. I don't know. There's a bunch of like Command Fest type things happening this weekend. I know there's like one in Indianapolis, one in Seattle. I think there's one in Florida. They're just all over the place, right? So SCG is running the one in Richmond, and they're also doing some 5Ks, some RCQs, and modern 20K that started on Saturday. And I guess we're recording this Sunday morning at 2 a.m. because that's the kind of sleep schedule I'm on, which happens to work out pretty well with your New Zealand time. So sort of still like in the middle of the event. And I don't know if this is stuff that we're going to get to talk about later on or anything. So I just want to give you like the Q&D of what is happening.
Well, yeah, I already saw the top 8 results from the Battle Hardened going on. So I know most of what I need to know. But if there's anything else, you can fill me in. I failed to mention that, yes, there is also some flesh and blood happening in the event. But I don't know. I'm me. So I didn't know if I was like going to play or if I was going to, register and then drop, or like register, play around and then drop. It all depends on how I'm feeling, right? But I had that Izzet deck for Modern that I was really liking and was working on that a little bit. And at some point came up with the brilliant idea of adding Mopey black cards to my blue and red deck to make it a fully fledged Grixis deck. Perfect. What could go wrong? That always makes all these decks better.
In theory, it does. Absolutely.
In theory.
On paper, looks phenomenal. So I have that list, and I don't know. I could post it at some point, but it's one of those things where it's like, don't try this at home, kids. So I eventually, I think like Wednesday, I was just like, I should not do this. Like if there's a tournament here, it's pretty easily accessible. I don't know how many tournaments I'm going to play in necessarily. Like I should try and win. I should play something that I know is good, right? So like I went back to actually just retooling the Izzet deck, made a couple changes that I thought were really, really good, and I was dead set on playing, right? Enter one Joshua Cho. I told him maybe a week earlier, like, hey, this Richmond thing is happening. I don't know if you have any interest in coming down, blah, blah, blah. He was like, yeah, no, I'm good. And then Thursday, he was like, actually, no, I might come down. I'm like, okay, because I don't know. It means that I have to put like a second deck together potentially, and also, figure out what I think like would be good for him to play and good for me to play and everything. And
eventually settled on it is probably best for him to play Izzet cards and for me to find something else. So then I went to work figuring out what that something else was going to be.
And what was it?
And we'll get there. So then a few hours later, he's like, actually, I'm coming down tonight. So he had looked at the event schedule, and there was a sealed 5K starting on Friday. I didn't know that it's just like a full 3-day thing.
Yeah, I think I did know that. I've heard rumors of a full 3-day thing.
Yeah, I didn't. Maybe I should have known, but I just didn't think that would be a possibility or whatever. So he was like, yeah, I want to play sealed bright and early Friday morning. And I was like, oh, okay. So then instead of working on decks and whatnot, I was like, well, I should probably get this place suitable for guests, So there is no better feeling to me than like the feeling of panic and just the fact that like deadlines are approaching, because it makes it so I actually get shit.
Yeah, it's certainly the best motivator.
Yeah. And was talking to a few people this weekend, fellow ADHDers who can certainly relate. And we're just kind of sharing stories like along those lines. And it's, just stuff that like I've been here for 6 months or whatever. Right. And I certainly should have just done this stuff a long ass time ago, but like, I don't have guests. Like, who cares? Right. But this gave me a good reason to like actually get some stuff done, which then put off the Magic stuff. And, Josh showed up, we hung out for a little bit, went to sleep, woke up, went to the sealed thing. And I was like, I'll figure out the deck stuff on Friday. Right. So Josh, the morning of, is like, oh, I should probably look at the spoiler because I have no idea what's in this set.
Yeah, decent idea.
Which it's pre-release weekend, whatever. I mean, I'm sure he was not the only person doing that, but we figured some things out after Josh opened his sealed deck. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
There is a battle in every pack.
Okay.
There is also the multiverse legend stuff.
Yeah. How much of that is present?
There's one in every pack.
Oh, that's more than I expected.
There are 65 of these cards.
Okay.
And
they're mostly pretty good, right?
Like, a lot of them are pretty good. Yeah. A lot of, various Praetors and whatnot. So
Ragavan.
you could end up having like the mythical sealed deck with 18 rares. Mm-hmm. So yes, Josh, round 3 or something. It's like sitting next to someone, thankfully not sitting across from them, but like person just like, yeah, turn 1 Ragavan, go. It's just like, holy shit,
yeah,
man.
It's just good limited.
Are you kidding me? And then, yeah, there's stuff like Skitherix and
perfect.
7 mana, unbeatable Elish Norn, Brutaclad, found out what that card did. You know that card?
Sure don't.
Is it 6 mana 4/4, legendary, whatever. Creature tokens you control have haste. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 blue Phyrexian Mirror artifact creature token. Then you may choose a token you control. If you do, each other token you control becomes a copy of that token.
Oof. Pretty good with like the processor stuff.
You mean the incubate stuff?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So that is not a light bulb that immediately clicked in my head. But yeah, as it turns out, that's a very strong interaction. Yes, you are correct. And then, yeah, just random Gigantha companions and shit. Just completely wild, man. It's so weird because the rest of the set seems really good for limited. I like the look of like everything that I saw going on, It seems like high power level, but there is a lot of counterplay. Unlike, I guess, 1 was the last set, but like even Streets, like people had that complaint where it's just like, you get run over, there's not a whole lot you can do, blah, blah, blah. I think that's very, very different in this set, but then you're just like throwing a bunch of like weird ass mythic rares into it too.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a good foundation and then it kind of got handed over to the Clown Squad at some point where just anything could happen, and which is like,
I don't know.
That's fine in its own regard. Like, I don't think that's the worst thing occasionally to happen. I wouldn't want to play sealed in that format, but I think it's like it's generally okay if you want to do that.
Yeah. So anyway, Josh Joe very easily makes top 8 of the sealed tournament. And at some point I'm like napping in the car because my sleep schedule is a mess, and just sleep like absolute garbage before the event. I think I woke up at like 3 a.m. or something. So yeah, my Friday was really weird. Josh was just like crushing people, and then the top 8 draft started the next morning at 8:30 a.m. So we had to get up at 7 to get ready for this thing. But in actuality, I slept for 2 hours or something and got up at 5, and I'm just a mess, man. But anyway, I was awake and also had some time before the modern thing started to finally do my homework, and I was doing some on Friday, and I was like, okay, well, I think I will try out Omnath again, because there have been some fairly successful lists recently, and I had some ideas and everything, and I think I did a lot of good work. Again, like the panic, the deadline setting in made me actually break down and like look at the mana base and figure out what combination of like triomes and duels and fetches and everything was actually correct. And I think I ginned it, dude. I think I actually like nailed the mana base, but the tournament did not go great because I didn't play any games beforehand, so I didn't really know that this was going to be a problem. But the list that I did well with before, the Urian, Traverse, Risen Reef thing, was super clean because it had like low land count and Traverse. And then this one doesn't have any of that, that cleanliness. Like the other version kind of functioned like some sort of like cantrip based deck, like not playing out like Delver exactly or whatever, but like that sort of thing where it just felt like you always had, the right colors of mana, the right mix of lands.
Yeah,
and
you got your options reliably.
And this one didn't really have it. I think 4 of the 5 games I lost, it was like my turn 6 rolls around, I take my draw step, and my hand is a second copy of Wrenn and 6 and 5 land.
Not ideal.
Nah. So gotta go back to the drawing board and figure out that aspect of things. But as far as like, controlling the game, making sure I don't die, getting a bunch of 2-for-1s or whatever, like the deck was very, very good at doing that. And a lot of that had to do with Risen Reef, but like the Traverse one just had so many copies of Risen Reef that you could just double up. And even if your draw was like a little land light or a little land heavy, you're drawing like 5 cards a turn or something once you have 2 Risen Reefs, right? So it was pretty easy to fight through it at that point. But this version was just like, I have 1 Risen Reef and it like kind of helps, but you never really get to the point where you're actually just like steamrolling your opponent, So maybe Risen Reef is not it because it's not as easy to like double up on things. I did play 2 copies of the 5 mana Elish Norn, but I just never got to cast it. So
hear me out. 80 cards, no Urian. That's what you're missing, Gerald. That's where all the consistency lies. You get to put it all back together.
I mean, add 20 cards, but 4 of them are Mishra's Baubles and 4 of them are Traverse. And suddenly everything is unlocked. It's super consistent.
I hate being that person, but like there probably is some merit to considering like what a 72, 74 card. Like, is there actually a list where you expand and it becomes better because of it? I do think that is possible more often than we give it credit for. It's not easy. It's not something that should happen all the time, but it is more possible than we give it credit for.
The flip side of that is why not just play 60 and play 3 ofs?
You could do that. I mean,
it's not like
I think
I'm adding a bunch of tutor targets to my deck that I don't want to.
That's what I was going to say, is that if there's 1 ofs, then that sort of negates that. Which I have to assume there's some when you're playing Traverse, right?
When you're playing Traverse, yes. Yeah. I had Eladamri's Call in my deck for a little bit, but it's just so clunky and so bad, and I hate it so much that that combined with the fact that you don't have Mishra's Bauble and a bunch of like 1 mana things that go to your graveyard anymore. So like the Emrakul, the Promised End, is not as appealing. I was like, God, do I even want this in my sideboard?
And then Magus of the Moon has its own problems, especially when you're cutting Abundant Growth because you're not playing Urian. So I was like, the tutor targets that I would have in the old version for Traverse in my sideboard, I was like, I don't even want to play with Eladamri's Call in my deck. So that, it's clunky, it's pretty mopey. I was just like, I'm just going to cut it, play a raw second copy of Elish Norn and like not be tutoring and stuff. But yeah, it was interesting. And then Josh played the Breach version of Izzet. Again, basically blind, had no practice with it, had a bunch of like Murktide reps, right? But this deck is very, very different, and it's very specific. Like you kind of need to know exactly like what you're trying to do in each game, and he didn't have the reps for that. And I wrote a sideboarding guide for him, but like a lot of it was like, if X then Y and do all this sort of stuff, and it, that was not easily transferable, I guess. It was just like stuff that I'm able to figure out when I'm there, like playing the games or whatever. But like when he's just trying to like follow my instructions, the instructions are very, very unclear.
Turns out Magic is a hard game. Who knew?
It is. It's really hard to just be like, oh, well, the Magic the Gathering Cliff Notes are thus, right? It's just like, nah, it doesn't really work that way.
As much as we would like it to. I mean, I often approach it that way. And sometimes it works out, honestly. Like you've built up, 20 plus years of reps. You were able to get away with some of that. But also it will occasionally humble you and make you feel very foolish at the same time.
Yeah. So I learned a lot in regards to 4-color. I do want to talk about that mana base at some point. Basically, the secret lies, Brian, in Mardu Triome.
Okay, as it always does. So we know the answer to all things is always Mardu. So
exactly. So Mardu Triome, Breeding Pool, casts all of your stuff, including like sideboard cards, and you have to change around the fetches and play like Wooded Foothills instead of Misty Rainforest, stuff like that. When you don't have a basic mountain in your deck, but I think it is actually like some Galaxy Brain stuff. I was pretty pleased with myself.
Sounds like an interesting problem to solve.
It was, but I knew it was going to take a while, So I just needed like that panic, that deadline, and then I actually just spent an hour on it, and I think I got there. So if I ever revisit that deck, then I will have a very, very good starting point, and now I actually have like, this was basically like the play testing for me. I got that under my belt. But
for that big tournament that's coming up.
Well, yeah, I know we're going into Pioneer season 2, which is kind of disappointing because I really like Modern, don't really like Pioneer. Although, again, we're still in the middle of the event, right? But like, there's an RCQ tomorrow that I can play that starts at 2 p.m. which
that's nice,
rules.
yeah.
Just get to sleep in. And the other incredible thing about it is it's just 5-round single limb. If you 5-0, you get it.
As they all should be.
Awesome stuff. So I'm not excited to play Pioneer, but it's just like, the format is so good,
What about mom cards? Are they legal in that RCQ?
Oh, yeah. That was kind of the other thing, too. It was like, this is pre-release weekend, and like, no one owns any stuff, and like the vendors don't have it. But like, that stuff's legal.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, shit. Okay. Well, I wasn't really thinking about that. So then we did like another glance through the spoiler and was like, are any of these cards good in Modern? It's like, nothing that we're interested in.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about Modern, but Pioneer, I actually think this is quite an exciting set, and maybe a card that we also think is exciting in Standard will have an impact on Pioneer. We can talk about that when we get there.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we have our top 10-ish list. My rules were no boring removal, sweepers, lands, or reprints. Just because if we wanted to like put good removal spells on the top 10, we would probably just have like a top 7 instead, and that's no fun. It's like good card is good. We understand.
Yeah, there is some quite good removal in this set too, but we get that.
And then the thing that I tried to live by as far as like which cards deserve to be on the top 10
are ones that I will be surprised if they don't see standard play, which I think is generally a pretty good metric or a way of thinking about it, because we can look at cards and be like, this is very powerful, but it's not what the format wants right now, or there's not a home for it or whatever. And it's really hard to kind of like balance the two where, do you want to just like rate things on power level in a vacuum, because that's not really how anything works, right? Like everything is context dependent. So like I want to talk about cards that I think are actually going to see play and like make an impact in the format. I think that is the most relevant version of the show that we can produce.
I agree with you, and I took a very similar approach to my list. And what is most interesting is that our two lists, they came very close to each other, like very, very close, which is either a sign that we're smart and we figured things out and we think about this the same way, or we've spent too much time around each other and we've warped our brains to see through each other's twisted viewpoints, and now we will both be made a fool of with this top 10 list.
Correct. Yeah, you sent me your list and I was in the middle of working on mine. Like I went through, basically wrote down all the cards that I liked, and then I was starting to narrow it down. I think I had like 6 or something, and I think 5 of my 6 were on your list or something. And then certainly like the rest of your cards were also in the bigger master list that I made. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, yeah, maybe we just like hive-minded each other and we're very wrong, or maybe we're onto something. I don't know. But removal spells that I really like for this set are Pylon, Stoke the Flames, Volcanic Spite, Nahiri's Warcrafting, and Sunfall. And not gonna, go ahead and like read those cards or anything, but like just so you know, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, Pylon was the one that really stood out to me. Probably like a pretty high contender on my top 10 list should we include removal. But like you said, that's boring. Just assume that card is really, really good.
Yeah. And dude, where do you want to start? Because I have like this list of cards that I just want to like shout out by name. I have an honorable mention that I want to talk about like a little bit more in depth. We had another card that we ended up cutting from our top 10 that want to talk about a little bit. So like where do we begin?
Let's hoot and holler about the cards that ultimately didn't make the list, and then we'll work our way through the list. And that includes those honorable mentions, the cards that, kind of got left behind in our bartering process where we solidify our top 10 list. All that stuff can live in this section of the podcast.
Okay, so so some of the cards on this list, I will admit, are not necessarily things that I would expect to see standard play, but this is more of the like, this is the stuff that I like, and I think it's like cool or good or could potentially find a home or whatever. But it's because they probably won't see play, or some of them. One of them is Captive Weird. That's the one where it's like, I like this, but it definitely does not fit the rules of like what it takes for it to be on the top 10 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That's one of the cards. Dejaru and Hazaret, Elish Norn, Chandra Hopespeakin, Fairy Mastermind, Grafted Butcher, Surge of Salvation, Progenitor Exarch, Dusk Legion Duelist, Thalian the Gitrog Monster, Zimone and Dina, Bloodfeather Phoenix, Zurgo and Ojutai. I think all those cards, are pretty good and could potentially be in the top 10 for most of them. And just goes to show kind of like how deep the set actually is.
20 cards deep. I think that's a good way of putting it. There's just like 20 really good cards that have a very high chance of not only seeing standard play, but being important players in standard. And these being left out shouldn't render them unplayable. Well, maybe some of them, but they're mostly very interesting cards that I would be looking to build around on day one and see if I could find something really powerful outside the current prescribed metagame.
You remember how high people were on Concealing Curtains?
I do. And
I think Captive Weird is just better than that card. Not that
that doesn't say anything whatsoever. Although Concealing Curtains recently just made a top 8 of the last, whatever they're called, RC, I guess. There finally was one copy of Concealing Curtains in the mix. So,
well, there you go. As far as the bartering card, you want to talk about Shieldred?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from on this card. This is one that was on my list, not on your list. And I I do understand why when you look at comparables, Sheoldred.
All right, let's read it real quick.
Yeah.
From here on out, we'll read the cards. So Sheoldred is 3BB, 4/5 legendary creature, Phyrexian Censor, menace. When this enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature or planeswalker. 4B, exile this, then return to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as sorcery and only if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Backside is the True Scriptures, a saga, Chapter 1. For each opponent, destroy up to 1 target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Chapter 2, each opponent discards 3 cards, then mills 3 cards. And Chapter 3 is put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. Exile this, return to the battlefield face up.
Yeah, and I think your biggest knock against Sheoldred is in the competition spot, which, like I said, very much makes sense. There's things like Cruelty of Gix, Invoke Despair. Those are banger cards at 5 cost, already very much occupying that spot in black. However, I think that Sheoldred has the highest floor of all 3 of those cards. And I get that that's not always what determines success. Like it is very much about like spike turns and getting the most out of your cards. I think there is no such thing as a bad Sheoldred. It's just going to be this stupid 4 or 5 menace at an acceptable cost, and you can live with that. It's never going to be a disaster, and you're probably going to get something when you play this. It's very rare that it's just blank and a 4 or 5 menace, but even if it was that, you'd be like, okay, not what I was looking for here, but I can live with it. Especially when you add into the mix the ceiling on the backside of this card, which I'm not at all convinced you have to work for. I think you just play the game, and then the ceiling will eventually.
If it happens, happens.
It will eventually become available to you, and that backside, this flip saga, is game winning, and that's enough for me. Like you have a combination of a very high floor. This card doesn't really fail, and this game winning ceiling. Like the range it is occupying on that spectrum, in some ways feels larger to me than the range of Invoke Despair. Now I get you can just like play Invoke Despair and win the game on the spot. That is very, very hard. Like actually just win the game ends. That's very, very hard to compete with as far as the ceiling goes. But I think like when you talk about total impact in terms of like comeback potential in a game that you really should have no business eventually winning, I think Sheoldred goes a lot further to closing those gaps. I think this would have been on my top 10 list despite all the competition it is going to face. And at some point that competition is going to leave. And then I think Sheoldred is just like the banger 5-drop choice, at least for the time being.
Listen, I've played Guiltleaf Winnower in Constructed.
It's not good. I'm not trying to say it's good.
And no, I'm saying like that card sucked. Yeah. And it was still correct to do, and I was happy that it was in my deck. This is just such far and away a better version of that type of thing. Just like a 5-mana Flame Tongue Kavu. Effectively, it has the awesome non-token creature clause, which I think is super undervalued. It has 5 toughness, which matters a lot.
Extends to Planeswalkers, which is kind of new for this type of effect.
Yeah, normally it's just like, well, if you want to play this, it's good against creatures, bad against any sort of like controlling or mid-range deck. Not true here. Has meta still. And then, you have the backside thing. But the problem I do have with it is Invoke Despair existing, and you could maybe make the argument for this is easier to cast.
Yeah, that doesn't really matter all that much.
It doesn't matter right now. And it's kind of silly, but I think a lot of people will be like, well, it's like 1 colored pip, like how much does it matter? It actually does matter a lot, especially when you're talking about like going into like the 3rd black when you're normally playing like 3 color decks. But in this specific instance, it basically doesn't matter at all. So I do like Sheoldred as a card. It's just in the context of things, I mean, people they refuse to put down Invoke Despair even when I thought they should, right? And they're certainly not going to put it down now that there's a different 5-drop. It's like it is a thing that people are going to continue doing. It's intoxicating, like resolving that card, right? Like you feel like a god.
Fair enough, yeah.
So, whereas you're absolutely correct that the floor on Sheoldred is much higher. It's like if you are very far behind. Shieldred is much better, just getting like the extra body, and in a lot of instances, Invoke is either, just, draining them and drawing you some cards, or killing like their absolute worst stuff. And I think for the most part, Shieldred is going to kill something good. It's providing a relevant blocker body, possibly helps you like win the game quicker too if your opponent's still like a full 20 and everything. But ideally, those decks don't get into those situations where they're super far behind and Invoke can't save them. So that's kind of their whole game plan.
No, that's true. You build around that card, and you can do so very successfully.
So if I'm wrong, dude, I'm happy, because that means we get to play this card, and I think that would be sweet. But I don't see it happening, but I could definitely be wrong.
Okay.
So my honorable mention is Invasion of Kaldheim. And this is a battle that costs 3R. It has, the text version on Scryfall doesn't list the defense.
4.
I think it's 4.
It's 4.
Okay. When this enters the battlefield, exile all cards from your hand, then draw that many cards. Until the end of your next turn, you may play cards exiled this way. 4 defense. Backside, Pyre the World Tree, enchantment, discard a land card. This deals 2 damage to any target. Whenever you discard a land card, exile the top card of your library, you may play that card this turn. I think this card is really powerful and really cool. It just does so many things that are weird as hell that it's difficult for me to imagine where exactly this fits in, but I do believe in it. Like, I do think that this card is going to show up and do good things, but I couldn't tell you remotely what that is going to look like right now.
Well, I agree with you in terms of power level on this card. I think it's absolutely there. And if you listen to our cast where we first talked about Invasion of Kaldheim, you kind of went through the discovery process with us. And I am a believer in the output of this card. I just think it's got more of a role to play in older formats. I think it just really goes to the moon there. And that's not to say it's unplayable in standard, or maybe you can't do something in that space as well. I do think that is within the range of possibilities. It's just so much easier for me to see a path forward when it comes to modern, maybe even Pioneer. But that speaks volumes about just how good this card is. And that means it's worth finding ways to build around it when you get to standard. So if the pieces line up, I think there's no doubt this card has the pedigree to be good enough and deserve a spot on the top 10. That's a big if, though, and we have to kind of watch and see if that happens.
Yeah, and again, the set is pretty good, right? So if the set were a little lighter, you could make some more speculative picks for things like this, and I think not be too far off base. But yeah, now talking about how like this is actually legal in the tournaments that are happening this weekend and how the thing is Pioneer tomorrow. I mean, if there's any format where I thought that this is maybe potentially busted, like, maybe there are better ways to like blink it or whatever, just like actually try and abuse the hell out of this thing, or have ways to maybe take advantage of the backside better than you could in standard. Like, Pioneer is probably it. Pioneer is probably the sweet spot,
I think
right? So someone has me a list and also has a time machine, I guess, because this probably won't come out till like Monday or whatever. Hit me up. I want to know. I want to see your Invasion of Kaldheim Pioneer.
No, that's for that next mythical tournament that you're preparing for right now.
Again, Pioneer season is coming up, so maybe it's not that mythical.
Fair enough.
Okay. We didn't exactly order these. I guess we could have, but I think there was also a pretty clear divide between like the top half and the bottom half. So we just sort of split them like that. So we got like a top 5 and a bottom 5.
Of the top 10, yes.
Of the top 10, yeah. But talking about the bottom 5 cards in the set would probably not.
No, nobody would listen to that show. I'm surprised they listen to this show, honestly. But yeah, definitely not the bottom 5 card show.
Same. Should we just go and like how I have them listed? Because like, who cares?
Yeah, that works.
Okay. So this card is anywhere from number 6 to 10. Tied for 6th. Let's say that. Scorn-Blade Berserker. I don't know what happened with this one. Was this like we'd gone through the black cards and then the full spoiler came out?
I believe so. I believe this was a late ad, or it's an uncommon. Sometimes we pay a little less attention to uncommons, but this is not the type of one that you and I would typically ignore. So
no. Okay, so this is B for an 0/1 creature human berserker, backup 1, backup is when this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. If that's another creature, it gains the following ability until end of turn. And the ability that this card has that it can also grant to something else is 1, sacrifice this creature, draw a card. Kind of similarly to Invasion of Kaldheim. I don't know what the hell exactly we're supposed to be doing with this thing, but it's also probably a lot easier to figure out than something like Invasion of Kaldheim.
Yeah, I just think you get up to some of the same shenanigans you've always gotten up to with these effects. You have disposable creatures lying around. You have benefits from when your creatures die. You now get this.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, I thought of one.
Who you got?
That blue and black card.
There's several. There's several of those. Which one?
No, the business and the delis, the team up. Hidetsugo and Kairi.
Okay.
The 5 mana ETB, draw 3, put 2 back. When this dies, exile the top card. Target opponent loses life equal to its mana value.
Yeah.
And then if it's an instant or sorcery, you may cast it without paying its casting cost. There's like the 10 mana deal 8. I saw people building decks around that, and it's like with this card, what you want is a way to sacrifice it or whatever, right? And this kind of like.
Oh, it's a very, very reasonable way to go ahead and sacrifice this card, and I just think this card is such good glue, right? Like the worst version of this card is a 1 mana 1/2 that you can just block with and then pop off and turn it into another card. That's the worst version of this card.
And it's a human.
Yeah, that's a really good worst version. Like that is just fantastic. I'm more than happy to do that. When this is splitting its ability across 2 places, when it's using its 0/1 ability to fuel something else, like Village Rites or whatever sacrifice fodder you want to use, but it's also imbuing its draw a card ability to someone else, and you're able to just cash in that fodder you have lying around. It's really cool how many options this card gives you. While again, we talk about floors and ceilings a lot when it comes down to top 10 shows. I just think the floor on this card is one that I would happily play. You could not have these backup shenanigans. You could just have a black creature that had, honestly, it could be probably an 0/1 black creature that had 1 sacrifice this creature, draw a card, and I would still be at least somewhat interested in it. I would try and find a home for it.
Yeah. Might not be top 10 or whatever, but you'd still look at it and be like, this is playable.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I've built too many decks that try and leverage these type of effects over my very long Magic career. And it's glue like this that makes those decks really, really shine. So I just think this is a good solid tool to have in our standard toolbox, maybe in our Pioneer toolbox. Like I could see it. It's very, very cheap. It does a unique thing.
Actually, yeah. I mean, I've messed around with a bunch of different versions of Mayhem Devil decks in Pioneer, and my lists were way more low to the ground than a lot of other people's. I think I just played like fewer 3-drops in general, and some of the 1-drops are really, really good, right? But sometimes you end up playing stuff like Shambling Gas when it's like, that's not really a Pioneer power level card. Maybe when there was like a bunch of Llanowar Elves in the format, which is when I was messing around with that deck, there was. But that with like Unlucky Witness and stuff like that, it just like, it definitely gives you such a high concentration of, different sack outlets and stuff too. And that deck is a pretty big fan of just having additional, 1 mana creatures anyway, and this one is pretty good at that. And I don't know, Todd Anderson was doing like Tyvar Collected Company stuff, and ended up playing one of the crappy like BE2 ones because he could like return it or whatever. And it's just like, I don't know, something like this just seems like so much better in a deck like that. And obviously we're doing like Priest of Forgotten God stuff. Tyvar is returning things on the cheap, and yeah.
I also wouldn't sleep on the ability to just ship this +1/+1 counter wherever you want it. Like that is a very real combat breaking effect, all coming alongside all these other things you get from this very, very small package. So
no, that's true too. All right. Also tied for number 6, we have Bloated Processor, 2B, 3/2 creature Phyrexian. Sacrifice another Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on this. When this dies, incubate X, where X is its power. Incubate is create an incubator token with X +1/+1 counters on it, and 2, transform this artifact. It transforms into a 0/0 Phyrexian artifact creature. Noteworthy that it's not like exile it, then bring it back. Like if the token has been around, you get to attack with it the turn you activate it. So I've liked this mechanic. I mean, I was watching like games of Limited, right? But I definitely see the appeal in Constructed. I think the activation cost is not that big of a deal for the most part. And I think that the incubate stuff, when it's on cards like this, where it does appear to be like pushed for Constructed, like the number is high enough that it's worth paying that mana or whatever. Like it looks like it is going to play pretty well and be reasonably powerful too. So I don't know. This card I like a lot, and there's already like a lot of Phyrexian stuff. There's certainly a ton of Phyrexian support in this set also.
Yeah, I think this card is just badass. It's the reason I want to explore Phyrexians as a tribe. In multiples, you kind of get this protection for your bloated processors where you always get the incubator token out of it. And I just think like, man, Phyrexians are pretty good. And the one that stands out, like the one that solidified, I was going to put this on my top 10 list. I was pretty close anyway, but then I saw Grafted Butcher, and Grafted Butcher is 1 colorless black creature, Phyrexian Samurai. When Grafted Butcher enters the battlefield, Phyrexian you control gain menace until end of turn. So now this thing has become challenging to block. Other Phyrexians you control get +1/+1. Okay, so now these stupid little disposable Phyrexians are larger and annoying and asking you for impossible blocks in situations where this is coming out of nowhere. And oh, by the way, sacrifice an artifact or creature, return Grafted Butcher from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So pretty good lord on the front side. Then you get some additional protection in the form of this ability that just returns it from the graveyard. Now you have a deck that I really do think is worth building, worth exploring, worth trying to find some way to get all this stuff to work. I mean, you can even go back to the Berserker as well. I understand that's not a Phyrexian, but that kind of stuff works really well here, adding sacrifice outlets to new spots and just having disposable fodder around for other effects. And there's things like our new Village Rites, which is called Corrupted Conviction. Additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards for 1 be in an instant. So there's lots of little pieces around that make all of these synergies look really good. Of course, we had Phyrexian Might producers from the last set, so plenty of disposable fodder around. Really like the way this deck looks. I don't know if it's good, but I know I really, really want to build it. And this is a very powerful way to give this ability to the tribe.
Yeah, and even just like a 3-mana, 3-power creature, when it dies, you basically get another 3-power creature.
It's great.
Like, that's still pretty good too.
I agree.
So, shit, man. This card is pretty nice.
I'm with you.
All right. Tied for 6th, number 3, Kogla and Yidaro, 2 RRGG, legendary creature, ape, dinosaur, turtle, 7/7. When this enters the battlefield, choose 1. It gains trample and haste until end of turn, or it fights target creature you don't control. Also has 2 RG. Discard this. Destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. Shuffle this into your library from your graveyard, then draw a card. I'm just now noticing that it's up to 1 also. Like you can just cycle this if you want to.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Dude, this card is so generous. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. Just every single part of it is like, why are you letting me get away with this? Like, why do I get a 7/7 for 6? I'm very happy with that. Why can it either trample and haste and end games on the spot, or be a Flame Tongue Kavu and just absolutely murder something? Why when I use this, do I have to choose only up to 1 target artifact enchantment? I can just go ahead and get a free card here. It's so it's just
the big one to me is the disenchant also cantrips. That's the one where it's like, okay, yeah, you're really just laying it on.
But it cantrips, and then it puts the card back into your deck as well. Like, why? Why is it doing all of these things at the same time?
Well, that was your Yidaro text.
Oh, so. Yeah. I get broadly why, but in terms of just like not telling the story and just what this card does, it is freaking wild how much you get for it. And like, yes, it's a 6-mana 7/7, and that's typically not the type of thing that dominates in Constructed, but Trample Haste is a very big deal. Fighting the target creature you don't control, it's good. I mean, obviously it has some vulnerability to instant speed removal. I don't think you can do anything about that. But then you just have this Bizarro mode, which is so ready to foil some of your opponent's best laid plans. And, cards like Leyline Binding existing, the Kami War, like there's just huge impacts out of enchantments. And we've seen artifact-based decks prop up as well. So I don't know, man, just covering a lot of bases, and it makes me want to play like fair Naya decks. Like big Naya decks look very reasonable when you get to add this card to the mix.
Yeah, the thing about this card is I don't expect it to be a 4 of in whatever deck it shows up in, and it's also somewhat nebulous as to where exactly it is going to show up, but these type of effects have almost always found a home, and certainly this is like a very, very generous version of it. So I would be pretty surprised if this did not end up seeing standard play, even if it looks like things don't immediately line up. It's like this is one of those cards where it's like people will find a way.
Couple of copies of this, and there's that green battle that ramps. I'm not going to remember the names of the battles ever. Like that's just something I have given up on. But you ramp very nicely into this, and then you actually also just get your threat. It's Invasion of Zendikar. I looked, but you also get your threat if you want to go ahead and challenge that battle right away. And we talked a bunch about like, are you actually trying to challenge battles, especially because Invasion of Zendikar only has 3 power, but that does combine nicely with trample. Like you are almost not ever going to be able to protect invasion from a rampaging Kogla coming after it, and then you get that 4/4 on the backside, and you have 2 threats that now have to be answered. So really cool synergies going on here with the ramp spell as well.
I mean, also there's stuff like Dejeru and Hazoret, which is just like, well, if you wanted to do your best Winota impression and find a big thing to cast off it, well, this is
looks great.
Among the best of them, I'm sure.
I agree.
All right. Another 6th place card, I guess. Invasion of Gobakhan. And I just realized when I tried to control F, I have no idea how to spell Gobakhan. But I think I do now. I think we're there. This is 1 dub battle. Clicking on it. Yep. 3 defense. Just confirming. When this enters the battlefield, look at target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land card from it for as long as that card remains exiled. Its owner may play it. A spell cast this way costs 2 more to cast. Backside is Light Shield Array, an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attacked this turn. Sacrifice this. Creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn.
We talked about this card at pretty long lengths when we first discovered it, because it is so surprising, so unique in the battle context. It does something that is like slowly seeping its way into white, and we saw with the Elite Spellbinder just how powerful this effect is. Obviously not coming with a beater attached to it, but does have one of only 2 battles in the set with 3 defense. So it is very, very easy to transform, especially in the color white. And then there's some strategies where this is just extremely backbreaking. The scalable Anthem is going to just run over some games, especially when you combine it with the fact that you can then protect your creatures, giving them hexproof and indestructible when you flip this thing. I just think this is mostly upside. The 1/2 curve into Invasion of Gobakhan seems extremely powerful to me. You also, if you kill it, get the buff on that turn since it triggers at the beginning of your end step. Again, a pretty generous effect in my eyes. And I think just like this ability is so critical for white-based aggro decks to compete reliably. And there's another damn good tool for white-based aggro decks in this set. And I would be shocked if they don't get a lot more metagame share as we move forward after the release of Mom. And I think this card will be a sizable part of that.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I will say, though, that I think it's easy to look at this card and think about how a lot of these effects are like kind of middling, and you can see the downside of, if the board is kind of stalemated, or if you're in sort of like a top deck
real bad top
or whatever.
deck.
And I think that the fact that this card does so much and has the potential to do so much and the ceiling on this is, like you said, 1-drop, 2-drop into this, where you get to disrupt them a little bit, potentially transform this immediately, and then you have a thing in play that's both like pumping your creatures and protecting them. It's like, that's just like a free win on turn 3. in a lot of instances, you know? And it's like that ceiling is so high for, yes, a card that may end up having very little impact on the game. So like, how many of these do you actually want to play in your deck? I mean, if we are talking about like traditional white aggro with a very low to the ground curve sort of thing, it's like a solid 3 of in my mind. But like I could see playing 4 in a lot of instances. If you're maybe a little bit more mid-rangey, maybe you only play like 2.
Yeah, I was thinking like 2 main, 2 sideboard in the typical like aggro deck was the distribution I would start with. But I wouldn't be surprised if I play it and I'm like, oh no, I just want to draw this in every single game.
Yeah, or like maybe you want to draw it early because that is when it is most effective, right? So I don't know. I think from what I've seen, people have not been super stoked about this card. It's like you see the times when it does maybe just like win the game for you on the spot, but it's like, oh, well, in order to pump my creatures, you know, they have to like survive in combat, and that's not necessarily a given. And this is a thing that you're spending 2 mana to not impact the battlefield, and is certainly not very good if you don't have much of a battlefield presence. You know, it's like just the front side is definitely not a card you would play on, right? So I get all that, but at the same time, I'm just like, you try and work around that stuff, right? You try and make this card as effective and as powerful as you possibly can. I think that that's very difficult.
Yeah, play some disposable creatures, you know, make jump attacks, let those creatures get buffed up, and find a card which benefits you from having a bunch of disposable creatures out there on the battlefield, and maybe gives you a little bit of card advantage too. I wonder if we have anything like that coming up.
No, I doubt it.
Probably not.
Doesn't seem like something this set would be interested in.
Probably not.
The last card on the bottom 5 of our top 10 list kind of breaks my rules because it's sort of a removal spell. This is Invasion of Tarkir, 1R battle, 4 defense?
Yes. 5.
Nope, 5. 5. Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing that again today. I was like, oh, does that like move the needle at all? No, it doesn't. But when this enters the battlefield, reveal any number of dragon cards from your hand. When you do, this deals X plus 2 damage to any other target, where X is the number of cards revealed this way. Backside, Defiant Thundermaw, creature dragon, 4/4. Flying Trample, whenever a dragon you control attacks, it deals 2 damage to any target. So this is technically a removal spell, but it's like also a threat and also a build around, and does enough other things that it's not just like, oh yeah, Stoke the Flames is reprinted or whatever. Let's talk about that. So I like this card well enough, and I think it potentially just like adds an entirely new archetype to the format. So it's worth talking about.
I think it could. That's one of the reasons, though, it ended up on our bottom 5 as opposed to our top 5, though, is it sort of does need a new archetype. Like just this card on its face, this 2 mana sorcery speed, small removal that could potentially have some upside attached to it. That's not enough to sell me on this card. I think that's a recipe for disappointment. But when you start building around this, when you have dragons in your deck, and this becomes a 2 mana, 3 damage removal spell, 4 damage removal spell, 5 damage removal spell, well, then it's actually legitimately broken in those scenarios. Like, it is one of the most powerful things you can possibly do. And then if you just work around this restriction a little bit of having to transform this battle, and the card that stands out obviously is Nahiri's Warcrafting, which just pops this for 5 immediately. And like we talked about, that being a good curve, 2 mana, kill something, hopefully, 3 toughness, 4 toughness maybe with a dragon, 3 mana, Nahiri's Warcrafting this thing, and you just get your dragon immediately, which is extremely threatening, by the way. Like, that dragon is very, very good on the backside. That all makes sense to me, and I think that is an archetype that I would look to build around. I think Nahiri's Warcrafting is a fine card in and of itself, where you can potentially get an extra card out of it. It's probably not what it's there for. It's there to kill Shieldred and another 5 defense or toughness things, but when you get that upside, it's nice, and I do think that is a deck worth building. It just has some restrictions built into this card, which is good, because if it didn't, this would be absolutely absurd. But these restrictions seem very much worth it. I would build around Invasion of Tarkir for sure.
Yeah, 2 mana sorcery speed, deal 2 is definitely not exciting enough to get me to want to play it in a deck that had 0 dragons. But I also don't think that you need, 16 dragons in your deck to take advantage of this. It's like you could just be a Zergo and Ojutai deck that happens to play a few of these, and most of the time 2 damage is going to kill something relevant, but there are definitely going to be times where it comes up a little bit short. You just need like the option, the ability to potentially scale this at some point.
I guess too, the thing that like, I don't know that we've ever even mentioned this. I mean, it's expressly stated on the card, but it's so weird that I'm not sure we've ever talked about it. It's any target. So you could just go face with this. That was
exactly what I was going to say next.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, you can go face, or if you are playing a deck that has like a ton of dragons, you could potentially like invasion into invasion and just like kill the other invasion,
Sure, yeah.
And just get the party started that way.
Yep.
Obviously, that's a little bit of Magical Christmas land that requires a lot of very specific cards or whatever.
Yeah, you could also just go
any target.
Lava Axe in that spot as well if you're able to do that. So I think that'll probably be your more likely play in those scenarios.
Yeah, maybe. So again, very high ceiling on this. The backside is very, very powerful. 5 defense is a lot, but if you are doing bigger red type of stuff, I mean, generally when you're attacking, you're getting in for upwards of that number anyway, and a lot of your stuff probably has evasion and whatnot. So this looks really good to me. It's like a good piece of glue for some very specific homes, but is not, Bone Crusher Giant level of ubiquity or anything.
Yep, good way of putting it.
All right, that is the bottom 5. On to the top 5. You ready?
Pretty good bottom 5, by the way. Those are some damn good cards.
It's not bad. All right. Invasion of Alara. This is a battle that is 1 of every color, 5 mana total. When this enters the battlefield, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile 2 non-land cards with mana value 4 or less. You may cast one of those cards without paying its mana cost. Put one of them into your hand. Then put the other cards exiled this way on the bottom of your library in random order. And backside is Awaken the Maelstrom sorcery. This is all colors. Target player draws 2 cards. This is the one that I just started laughing at because it just does a bunch of
everything.
Stuff, so. Target player draws 2 cards. You may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. Create a token that's a copy of a permanent you control. Distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. Destroy target permanent and opponent controls. As far as things that maybe I should have thought about for like Pioneer or Modern, this is up there.
I think so. I mean, like, again, generous, a lot of value. And like, yes, this has 7 defense. That's a massive amount of defense. You really have to invest into destroying this thing, but like,
worth it.
Yeah, where you can play spells that pop it for 5 and you just like get your 2-drop through, pop this for 5, destroy their best thing. All of your stuff gets supercharged. Like, it's not so hard to invest 2 cards into this because you get paid immediately 2 cards on the backside. So, I mean, that's a good start for making up any card disadvantage you take by trying to awaken the Maelstrom.
You get 2 on the front side too.
That's true. It's just loaded with value, like very much in that Kami War vein where you just get so much and it's appropriate. It being another 5-color card. Maybe better. Yeah, it's possible.
So this card is one of the few battles where it is very close to win the game if you do actually manage to get the backside. I mean, like the spell could still be countered or whatever, right? So you got to kind of work around that. But this is somewhat reminiscent of basically like your opponent's life total is now 7 effectively, because if you do manage to actually get this thing off the battlefield, how the hell are you going to lose? Because even if you were behind, I don't think you are anymore.
No, I agree 100%. I think this deck is just all about like clean mana bases, big, stupid sorcery spells that just hammer your opponent with threat after threat after threat, alongside those very powerful 4-drop creatures. But like, you don't need to build around this 4 or less restriction all that much. I think you're just going to be very happy with what you turn up the vast majority of the time. And sure, like, you don't want to have a bunch of 1s and 2s in your deck. You're going to very much build towards 3s and 4s. But that's fine in the standard. Like, the 3s and 4s catch you up. They're so powerful. They can cover a lot of bases. You have modal cards, which you can exploit to go ahead and bridge those gaps between these 2 values. So it just feels like another build around. And we know this is not all that troubling of a mana cost. to deal with. I expect many, many decks built around Invasion of Alara, and Standard in particular. You know, my hopes for Pioneer Modern, I don't know yet. I think I am less optimistic there, but there are spells like just ridiculous format, like Omnath obviously exists. And when that happens, like, and a fair deck can be a real thing that you can do, and you eventually go off huge with things like Risen Reef into Omnath, maybe this is just fine. And it's just about adding another consistency piece to what you were doing.
You know what, man? If I would have thought about it a little bit harder, I probably would have played a copy of this in my deck just for fun.
Yeah, sure.
And for science,
I wouldn't shock me if at some point you want to play a lot of copies of this card in your deck.
Yeah, maybe that's eventually what it leads to. Thing I will note, though, is that you're talking about like, oh, maybe focusing more on like 3s and 4s. And it's like, that kind of makes sense, especially in the context of Standard, if you're leaning pretty hard on Triumphs and whatnot, because you're not really going to be able to curve out all that effectively like turns 1 and 2 anyway. But like, I actually like the idea of just like playing some cheap cards in your deck alongside this, because say, if you hit 2 1-mana cards, then yeah, maybe it's not the greatest thing in the world. But like, if you hit like a 3-drop and a 1-drop removal spell, like a cut down or something,
totally fine.
You put the cut down in your hand, and like, yeah, you invested 5 mana, you get 3 mana worth of value in this battle, but like, it then gives you something cheap that you can like weave in on the next few turns. So I actually like hitting cheap stuff.
Yeah, it's not the worst. It's not the end of the world.
I mean, I don't want to do the opposite where you're like, I only play 1-mana cards with this or whatever, but like, thinking that this is a card where it's like, oh, you can't play like low impact stuff in your deck because of this, I think is just wrong.
Yeah, I think too, finding those modal cards that really fill out this very nicely, that function as, obviously like the adventure cards come to mind, where you can go ahead and get your Bone Crusher Giant, or you can, because Bone Crusher Giant stabilizes so hard, or you can just like have the removal spell in hand. Getting that choice is going to be quite relevant a lot of the time. Yeah, I guess like fair Pioneer decks doing this type of stuff makes sense to me too. This is just a very real value engine.
So there is the Omnath Bring to Light deck that exists, and then there was another version that popped up that was cutting Bring to Light for just more Escape to the Wilds. Mm-hmm. And that is definitely one of the decks that I want to work on, not necessarily because I think it's great, but I think it is good and has a lot of cards that I like, and this is another card that just kind of like fits in that slot. It's just like, maybe not the exact top end, like not the tippy top end or whatever, but certainly a card that you could incorporate into that deck and have a lot of pretty good success with,
Feels like it, yeah.
I like it a lot. Next up, Phyrexian Censor, 2-dub, 3/3 creature, Phyrexian Wizard. Each player can't cast more than one non-Phyrexian spell each turn. Non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped.
More messed up Phyrexians. Like, I just want to find my black-white Phyrexian deck. I've got Skrelv, I've got Lords, I've got Sacrifice Outlets, I've got silly...
You got creepy triangle face thing.
Creepy triangle face. There's just so much silly stuff that this tribe is getting up to. Like, tribal decks are sort of a weird sell in this era of Magic, but man, this one seems really good. It's doing a lot of disruption, a lot of big bodies, a lot of challenging play patterns to answer in things like Bloated Processor, where we don't typically see these type of effects anymore in Magic for very good reason. Like, they're very, very hard to deal with. And then you have this disruption piece that just goes so hard for no reason as an uncommon. Maybe the best thing that could happen in terms of mitigating this card's impact on the format is that Phyrexians are a very real deck, and this actually has a hole in its plan, because if this is just shutting every single deck in the format down to one spell a turn, damn, that's like a really good place for these Phyrexians to be.
Yeah, and it encourages people to look for Phyrexians that they may not have played otherwise in order to kind of like break the symmetry too. Yeah. So maybe it's not like everyone is playing Phyrexian Tribal or whatever, but it's like, I don't know, maybe you just end up playing like a card or two because it doesn't get punished by this thing. And yeah, but both abilities, very good, very punishing. I
it seems pretty consistent that when there's Archon of Emeria type thing or a thing like this, it just inevitably ends up seeing standard play because there's like some deck that it ends up being super good against, right?
Yep. No, I think absolutely. I have no doubt that this is going to make a difference. Just look at how good the curve is for this deck. Like, not only do you have Skrelv at the 1-drop slot, but you have Progenitor Exarch, which is a card we talked about a little bit last week. That's XX white. When Progenitor Exarch enters the battlefield, incubate 3x times, transform target incubator token you control. So, just a fine 1-drop that scales very nicely throughout the game. We talked about Lords. I mean, what else do we have in terms of 1-mana Phyrexian black creatures? Are there any of those we can lean on? We have this Ichor Drinker. That's kind of lame. I'm sure there are more out there, and if nothing else, it is very much worth a Scryfall search at this point. Get all your Phyrexians in a row, figure out what you have access to, figure out what spells are going to form the backbone of this deck. Are you doing something like trying to convoke a little bit on the top end? Because we're getting there. We're slowly getting to this convoke card that I keep intimating towards.
There's a lot of good 1-drops already, so convoke starts looking pretty appealing. Yeah. And I was queuing up the search already when you mentioned it. So Progenitor Exarch, Skrelv, Crawling Chorus. Yep. A lot of the red 1-drops are like good Phyrexians. Evolving Adaptive.
Yeah, that's true.
Phyrexian Warrior.
Yep.
Rustvine Cultivator, if you want to do stuff like that. I don't really think so. But basically like all of the toxic cards, right? If you want to do something like that. Yep. That's kind of all the ones. Armored Scrapgorger's good. 2-mana mana creature. Ellis Ilkor, Sadistic Pilgrim. Do you know this card?
No, you're gonna have to read that one to me.
White black 2/2 legendary creature, Phyrexian Core Cleric. Death Touch. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. I've looked at this card for the Legends decks, but I didn't really notice that it was a Phyrexian.
Dude, that's it. I mean, Bloated Processor, kill you from wherever. Like, there's your deck. This is a done deal. This is a very, very real deck in my estimation.
Yeah, and then there's stuff like Norn's Inquisitor, 2-mana 1/1 ETB Incubate 2, which I think is probably just like good enough on its own, but also has whenever a permanent you control transforms into Phyrexian, put +1/+1 counter on it.
Seems fine.
Oh, the 2-drop 2/3 lifelinker that you can kicker for 1 and a B to Gravedigger is also a Phyrexian.
Yep.
That card's solid.
A lot of card advantage, a little bit of disruption wrapped into this. I'm a buyer. I'm a buyer in the Phyrexians.
Venser. I don't think we're doing much proliferating. No way, dude. Vron, Executioner Thane is a Phyrexian.
Okay. So everything good is a Phyrexian.
As it should be.
Dude,
this deck is great.
All will be one.
This deck is actually great. Like, white, black, sacrifice, whatever. Dude, Gix. Gix is awesome.
Yep.
Glissa Sunslayer. The Rat King. Phyrexian Rat. All right. Phyrexian Rager, if only.
Yeah, probably not Phyrexian Rager's time.
Defiler of Flesh.
Which one's that? I'm blanking on it.
It's like 4-mana 4/4 menace. Your black spells.
Right.
You can pay 2 life instead of a black mana or whatever.
Okay.
So all those things are Phyrexians. Airtie's Phyrexian. Dude, yeah, all the good cards are Phyrexians. So it does mean that the Censor might be a little bit weaker, but if you're like foolish enough to not play Phyrexians.
Yeah, you're just done for. You lose on the spot.
Yeah. Obliterator and Vindicator if you want to play monocolor. Obviously Shieldred. All right, well now I'm in the 5-mana stuff. This is not really where I want to be, but like the Masticore, hell yeah. That card is tight.
What if I told you there is a 5-mana card I'd be interested in for this deck? Especially if we're going to stay very low to the ground.
I was like, I would say you're lying, but then I realized what you're talking about. Okay, so the next card, Knight-Errant of Eos, 4-dub, 4/4, creature, human, knight. It's not a Phyrexian.
I know.
This
I don't
has
think
Convoke.
it matters.
Convoke. When this enters the battlefield, look at the top 6 cards of your library. Brian, that's danger text for you.
It is. I think I can get away with this
You may reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoked this. Put the revealed cards into your hand, then shuffle. This card rules.
It's so strong. We lived through the era of mono white on Arena. It's when we were playing like the most Arena, and Venerated Loxodon was, man, that was a format defining card, a absolute terror on the battlefield. And this is different. This does something completely different. I come very close to saying it's better, which is like extremely dangerous territory. The reason I say that is because like Venerated Loxodon so often was as much about itself than anything else it was doing with its pump ability. Like that was nice, but it was just the 4/4 body. In this case, you get that 4/4 body. So we go 1-drop, 1-drop, 1-drop is our plan. And we're just moving right along. And then we tap those 3 and 2 more mana. We get to look at the top 6, and we are up to 3 for our mana value of things we get to add to our hand. And we get 2 cards. That's so free. To say nothing of the 4/4 we just played on turn 3 with an additional mana up should we have another 1-drop. And that's why when we're talking Phyrexians, and we can talk about very, very cheap Phyrexians, I start getting excited with this as my top end, which is weird. This human knight is going to step in and fill that role. But like, tell me I'm crazy. Like it just seems completely fine if this is the thing we have to search with. And, you know, if our deck is all 1s and 2s, you don't have to convoke 3. You can convoke 2 and still find a very, very nice payoff, especially when you have things like Progenitor Exarch, which scales very well, just weird Phyrexian stuff. Like if you are able to get up to 3 and you're finding your sack outlet or your disruption, it all seems very, very good to me. And that says, you know, that's in one specific deck, to say nothing of just like, oh, I'll find the best white creatures I can possibly get, all the 1-drops, line them up, and then this card's going to run over you.
You know what I kind of just realized is that if you live the dream and convoke 5, you can chain these things too.
That's pretty wild. Pretty wild.
You know, like if the game is like really bogged down, like really going long or whatever, it's like, you have a potential power spike off this card too.
Yeah, you should be able to do that too. Like that's not unrealistic when you go 6 cards deep. Like you could very much chain through a whole host of these.
Yeah. So I like this card a lot. I agree that the 4/4 from Loxodon was very relevant, but in those decks, the added pressure was definitely
nice.
A very strong part of that card. But like we're not necessarily looking to beat down like that deck was looking to beat down, you know? We just happen to be doing sort of the same thing that makes a 5-mana convoke creature also look very appealing. And I think that if given the choice, I would prefer Knight-Errant to Loxodon.
Seems like it, and that's very, very high praise.
And again, there's also stuff like mid-range type of things where it's like, you know, this doesn't have to go in like a white weenie beatdown deck. It can also just be in, you know, some token deck or whatever, and still looks very serviceable there too.
Yeah, and Loxodon Hierarch did eventually branch out. I mean, it never quite shined as brightly as it did in those all 1-drop decks, but it did find some other homes as well, because this is just a powerful base to work from. And again, like this might actually be more powerful and have more flexibility than Hierarch did. So
yeah, there was an invitational where Jim Davis was playing like Mem Knight, whatever, Venerated Loxodon, and I don't know. Now it's like, okay, yeah, going back into older formats, like, is there cool stuff that you can do with this too? Because
double Loxodon redundancy is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could do that if you wanted to. So that's kind of interesting too. I'll let someone else do the work for that. I got some standard stuff to work on, some Invasion of Alara nonsense to work on. I got plenty on my plate.
A lot to work on with this set.
All right, 2 cards left. One of them is Wrenn and Realmbreaker. Josh opened one in his sealed deck, and I was like, I'll be taking that. Thank you. So I already got one of those. 1 GG, 4 starting loyalty, legendary Planeswalker Wrenn.
Static ability of lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, +1 up to 1 target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with vigilance, hexproof, and haste until your next turn. It's still a land. -2, mill 3 cards. You may put a permanent card from among the milled cards into your hand. -7, you get an emblem with you may play lands and cast permanent spells from your graveyard.
I think this is part of my Invasion of Alara deck. I think it's just like good.
Smart.
Yeah, I think it's just good glue. I think it just smooths out those mana concerns. I will be very happy to find Invasion of Alara with this card. And I do think like this was very much on the low end of my top 5. It is a card that I do see having some flaws and not having a super immediate home, but we know we don't care about that. We make homes for powerful cards, and something like there are quite a few cards, especially in green, that reference like permanence and ways to go ahead and benefit from that ability. Permanents do so much now. They're not constrained as they used to be, and you can have a deck that is just built around maximizing this -2 ability, like never missing, always just it being choose between 3 cards, draw it, and having the threat of this planeswalker killer from your lands, and this late game threat of ultimating, and the ability to recycle all these threats over and over and play these never ending games, like all that stuff. It's just so appealing. I think like there needs to be a bit of a shift in what Standard is about before it shines its brightest. But when it does, I think this card can be a big part of it, and I'm excited to see how it influences the way those decks are built.
Yeah, this is one of those cards where you're right. Like, there's no obvious home, but it is generally appealing enough that I wouldn't be surprised if it just ends up showing up in a lot of places.
Yeah, it's possible.
And there are 2 specific points on this card that seem very generous to me. First is giving the land hexproof. It makes it so
no punishment.
You just kind of like get to lock up having a way to defend this thing, and animate. You're like trying to animate to like put on pressure or like attack a battle or a planeswalker or something. But if your opponent killed your land, then maybe you'd be off of playing like your big card next turn or whatever. It's just like, you just get to do that with impunity. And I think that is really, really powerful. The other thing is like 4 starting loyalty with a -2 just means that this could potentially just be like a divination if you wanted to, with a bunch of selection and also like filling your graveyard and everything. So those 2 things specifically to me, I'm just like, this is really nice.
Hell of a top deck, hell of an early play. Like, it's covering just so many parts of the game very, very well, which I think is one of the more exciting features of this card.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. That's the thing that we don't talk about nearly as often that I would like, but it's also possibly because there aren't a ton of cards like them. Mm-hmm. It's like this is a very, very cheap card that is still a fairly reasonable top deck, especially if the sort of deck you're talking about has, 52 or something permanent.
Which I expect they will. Like, that's totally reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a bunch of sagas and artifacts and planeswalkers and battles and stuff like that. And some of them like Invasion of Tarkir, Shieldred type of stuff. It's like those are removal spells. Yeah. So you're getting actually just good selection on this, right? Like, can you imagine just like a 3-mana planeswalker where you get like 2 impulses out of it? Just, that's kind of like the floor. That's not even taking into consideration where it's like you could protect it for a turn and get 2 impulses plus or whatever. Like, that's super powerful, right? And that is basically what this card is providing you, assuming that you build around it. And I don't think it's that much of a downside to build around it.
I think the best and worst thing I can say about this card is that it makes me want to build the Rock. And any card that inspires you to build the Rock is simultaneously dooming you to failure, and a really, really good card. Because if it makes you want to build that horrible deck, it's doing something very exciting.
God, let me go back to 2006 Pro Tour Columbus, where I played the Rock. And let me put this card in my deck.
It would be a banger.
It would just be hands down the absolute best card in my deck. And my deck was not good,
Oh, the Rock never is, but.
Yeah. Oh, man, that
that exact deck, it did bad things to me. It just tricked me.
It enforces
repeatedly.
a lot of bad habits.
Yeah. Well, the problem was I kept winning, you know, like I won like thousands of dollars in like multiple PTQ, or, you know, PT invites with it or whatever. It's just like, I just wish that I would have gotten annihilated and then sold all my pernicious deeds or whatever. Vampiric Tutor, get out of here.
Yeah. Life would have been a lot simpler.
It would have been. Maybe I would have been playing stuff like Reanimator or Mind's Desire a little bit earlier, you know? Yeah, you could do that. You could just play like those decks and those cards in that tournament instead of playing My Elder. Anyway, last card, we have Rona, Herald of Invasion, 1U, legendary creature, human wizard, 1/3. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, untap this, tap, draw a card, then discard a card. 5/5, where that is a black mana or 2 life. Transform this, activate only the sorcery backside. Rona, Tolarian Obliterator, 5/5 legendary creature, Phyrexian Wizard, trample. Whenever a source deals damage to this, that source's controller exiles a card from their hand at random. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield under your control. Otherwise, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Mostly liking this for the front side.
Yep.
Kind of liking this because there is just a blue-based tier 1 legendary matters deck in standard already that is also kind of short on 2 drops and also has a mini discard sub-theme or whatever. But damn, this card does a lot.
Seems like the easiest ad you could ever get for those decks, and you'll very happily use this to filter your hands. And you know, one of the downsides of legendary creatures, Gerald, is that it's not good to draw a bunch of them, so some filtration mechanism is often appreciated, and this one is just about as free as they get. You're going to get to untap this. The body size is fine, like 1/3 for 2. I'm pretty happy to be able to stonewall some 2 power things. And then there's that backside, which I think is very, very good in some matchups, like actually just game winning in some matchups.
Yeah.
So you don't.
No, it's very good. It's just like, it's like Shieldred from the top of the cast. It's just like, we're not banking on this, but games will get to this point, and then it's like, oh, holy shit! Like this is really good.
And this card will just win those games in a lot of spots. And I think in some ways, like I am being influenced by this card's broader potential in Pioneer, maybe Modern, where I think this card might do it. Like this feels like combo potential, feels like new archetype potential for sure. I love the fact that it is playing multiple game plans, actually. Like you can go ahead and do the thing where you're just playing Rona plus some good cards, and then all of a sudden you have a combo kill, or you have a transformed Rona, which could just as easily be your beatdown win condition. Those are my favorite types of combo decks to play. So I am a big believer in Rona, but also when it comes to the standard context, it's just the freest ad on our top 5 list. Like, no way this card is going to see play.
Yes, I agree with all that. Is it the most powerful card in the set? Nope. I mean, not necessarily. But,
although in those combo contexts, it's going to feel like it sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. But, you know, again, I'm mostly focusing on standard, not really so much on Pioneer or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I do think that the strength of that deck in Pioneer is, you know, somewhat dubious. It is certainly yet to be determined, and I think there aren't better options for that sort of thing. But it's like, why play Retraction Helix when you can play like Lotus Field? You know.
I think you can find reasons for that, and I think it's because Lotus Field does one thing. It doesn't think very consistently, very well, but that's all it does. And one of the reasons Lotus Field has benefited over these past few months is that nobody really believed in it, and they were wrong. And I think that trend has started to change quite a bit, and people do see Lotus Field as a real thing. Whereas if Rona is built in myriad ways where you can focus on these combo kills, or you can just play fair, or you can do both simultaneously, or you find new ways to set up combo kills, or you're just like, I can just, you know, have one copy of Helix in my deck, and I have some way to go get it in the spot where this is actually beneficial. And cards like Mox Amber and Rona are just good cards in my deck doing this other thing. That's going to be where this card really starts to shine. And that's pretty plausible. Like, it's not too hard to just have a one of that unlocks your deck in a pretty dramatic fashion if you have the right pieces around it. So it only takes one little tutoring effect before that happens. Even if it's like a sideboard tutoring effect, there's so many ways to make this go down. So
sure.
I think there's just a lot of branching potential with Rona as a combo card, and that's why it's most exciting to me. Not for its raw output, not for the fact that it's, like you said, it is somewhat unique, but there's many things that sort of tread on the same ground. It's just, can they do it with as small of a package with such good cards? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've mostly seen lists that are more all-in combo versions and have not really figured out what I happen to have a good infinite combo in my otherwise serviceable deck or whatever. Like, I am all about those decks, absolutely, but until I see it, it's going to be hard for me to just be like, oh yeah, it's there, definitely. Like,
be the change you want to see in the world, Gerald. Be the change.
Again, dude, I have a lot on my plate, and this is not my forte, and people are really good.
I wish I had the time to help out with this one. Maybe I'll find a window to work on a little Rona.
Yeah, I mean, when someone presents a list that has a very good like plan A, plan B, then I can do my thing where it's like, change 10 cards, come up with some good sideboard plans, then we have a monster, right? So until we get to that point, that's what I'm good at.
All right.
Yeah, I guess in the terms of like Pioneer RCQ tomorrow, it's entirely possible I just play against some Rona decks. It's wild.
Could be. It wouldn't shock me.
All right, man. Closing thoughts? Anything you want to say?
Good set. Good solid set. Maybe a bit of a step down from the last few, but I'm not even, like, as we do this top 10, I'm not even sure about that. I just think there's a lot of cool cards here. And is it a little wordy? Is it a little overwrought and complex?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it is. I think you can't deny that. But, some of my...
I will say that some of that is tempered by, like, returning mechanics being, like, cycling and convoke and stuff, though. And they're, like, simple-ish mechanics. So I think that's cool. That's a good sort of fix for that sort of
Only
stuff.
A few cards in this set that made me laugh out loud. So that's pretty good. I feel like sometimes I look at these sets and there's like 15 where my mind is blown from the beginning. But yeah, I do think we probably have a contender for wordiest set ever on our hands, but I'll let the mathematicians figure that out and we can report back on that. But overall, I would say a solid 7 out of 10 is my rating for Mom. That's a scale based on nothing. Okay. Just whatever number pops in my head, I say it.
I feel like 7 is a little bit of an insult. I'm like 7.5 min, but like maybe an 8. I don't know. I like this a lot.
It's a cool thing. There's a lot of decks I want to build, and that's like one of the best credits I can give to a set, especially at a time when I'm, not playing a lot of Magic, but I'm just like, man, I'd really like to look through these Scryfall searches and put these decks together. So
yeah, and in different formats too. Like, that's awesome.
Yep, very true.
So I think this is a pretty big win. And then I also don't know how this is going to relate to like the Aftermath thing, like, should we sort of be evaluating that in tandem with Aftermath?
Yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We don't know how we're dealing with that one yet.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but just in general, I like this a lot for a lot of different reasons. And certainly, yeah, some of the stuff's very wordy. Some of the stuff made us just cackle in the middle of like reading the cards or whatever. But I also think that number is down for previous sets for whatever that's worth. So
might be.
Not like a great indicator or whatever. It's like if that happens at all, it is probably a bad sign. But if this is the last time they do like DFC big creature with hella abilities that turns into a saga or whatever, it's like, okay, good.
It's not.
I appreciate you.
It's not.
No, it might be the last time they do that specific thing. They'll come up with something bigger and better. Yeah. Don't you worry.
Even more words.
Cool, man. Let's get to building some decks. For me, Magic, you may be Flesh and Blood, but like, hey, if you want to dabble in some Magic decks, my Discord DMs are always open.
Well, I'm obviously ceaselessly devoted to Magic, as I am taking a trip to Middle Earth tomorrow, specifically to prep for the upcoming Middle Earth set. I'm going to head to...
Hey, hold on. I don't think we announced this, but I thought you and I agreed that we're just never going to talk about Middle Earth again on the
podcast? No, I'm all in now. I'm taking a trip to Hobbiton.
Okay.
And
all right, I will skip that week. You just let me know.
Okay.
But anyway, continue talking about
I'm just going to go to the Shire, and I'm going to see the film set where Lord of the Rings was shot, and I'm going to learn all kinds of Hobbit facts. And then next time we do a show on Middle Earth, I won't have so many actuallys on Twitter, and people won't yell at me as much. And that's all I really want, is to not be yelled at. That's like my main
just not true.
Motivator.
Because you're going to have these facts, and you're going to get like one slight detail wrong, or they're going to come at you with the like, oh, you know stuff about Lord of the Ring, name literally every Hobbit that's ever existed or whatever. It's like, you can't even show a minor degree of confidence because you're not completely all in like they are.
I just feel like I'll be able to lord this over some of them, though. The fact that I've been to the movie set, like that has to be worth some credibility points.
Maybe, but I think it's going to earn you more ire than anything.
Well, I'm also going to the glowworm caves tomorrow. So if there's fans of glowworms, maybe I can get them on my side.
I don't know what that is, but that sounds tough.
It's caves with glowworms. I don't know how to better describe it than that. There's some worms that glow, and they're on the ceiling, and the caves like glow, and it's supposed to be cool.
Awesome. When I was in New Zealand, we did some like touristy stuff. That was not even suggested to me because I would have done that.
It's a ways away. It's not in Auckland proper, so I got to take a bit of a trip. But I'm excited. It should be cool.
No, we went kind of like all over. We went to a few different places.
Who did you stay with when you were here?
Andrew Plinston.
Okay, that's all. That wasn't the answer I was looking for. I thought it was somebody else potentially, but
no. I mean, I'm sure like James definitely knows him.
Yeah, I would expect.
If you want to ask him about him,
I would expect.
APL is basically like, you know, what he was referred to as.
Okay, I'll check it. You know, I work with a bunch of New Zealanders who were in and about the Magic scene a bit, so I'll check it on APL and see if anyone has any info.
Yeah, incredibly gracious host. Was very, very awesome and nice. Like, just cannot say enough good things about him, honestly. And he made the trip what it was. You know, like him and his wife, Kaylee, for sure.
I mean, New Zealanders as a whole, awesome people. Hate to generalize, but everyone I meet is awesome and super welcoming. And I'm not surprised to hear that.
Is it weird going from like America to a place where people are nice to you?
I will tell you the actual weirdest thing. And I didn't realize I was doing this until so this is like my third time spending a month plus here in New Zealand now.
Yeah.
And I realized that when I'm in New Zealand, this is kind of a dark note to end the podcast on, by the way. So I apologize. You can skip it.
I can't wait for you to hit me.
When I'm in New Zealand, I'm in a public place. I'm not searching for the exits in case someone starts shooting. Like, seriously, I just realized that's not something that crosses my mind. Whereas when I'm in the States, I'm like, I need to be aware of this at all times. I feel like, so that's a pretty huge difference. And yeah, like I said, not the happiest note to end on, but a very real thing that I noticed during this trip.
Yeah, so you said dark. I didn't think it was going to be that dark, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Game.
Man, you're right. That is a tough place to end on.
I told people to skip if they weren't into it. Like I put the warning out there.
All right, game.
Good luck.